This is the retirement income showdown, SPIA versus tips ladder versus SPIA, investing in either one of those, trying to compare what the cash flow differences are over, say, a span of 20 years to each of those. Now, this is the grumpy, unqualified senior. It's winter 2026. And a note of caution, I've been and will remain wrong about everything in all likelihood. So I am going to move on from here quickly. And here is the requisite but important disclaimer. I won't read the whole thing. You've seen it before on many other podcasts, I imagine, but the content is for general information purposes only. It's not intended to be and should not be construed as financial, investment, legal, tax, or accounting advice. I'm doing this analysis for me. I did it. I thought someone else might see it and think, oh yeah, that's that might be worthwhile for them to consider. But of course, this doesn't consider your own personal financial situation, needs, etc. Consult with a qualified professional. In that case, I make no representation or warranty about the accuracy, completeness, or suitability of the information. Any reliance you place on this is strictly at your own risk. Okay. As I said before, I am wrong about everything, typically am, always will be. I'm no financial genius, 20 years in finance with an MBA, old MBA, 20 years on complex spreadsheets. Typical spreadsheet, though, has 5 critical errors, not just me. I probably have more than that, but hopefully not in this little thing I'm going to show you. I would say don't trust a thing, trust your own self and your own analysis. This is in line with my reality, no one else's. Well, what are Gus's daily worries? Gus is not my real name, by the way. It's just a convenient name, acronym for Grumpy Unqualified Senior. Okay, first, I spent a lot of years in corporate media at higher level positions, high enough to see what was going on. It's all about money, obviously. It's about advertising spend and let's see, AI algorithms that essentially try to keep your eyeballs on the content as long as possible so they can sell as many ads as possible. And that just has prompted anger at each other, and really it been hard for anyone anymore to discern what is true and what is not. It's that old post-truth environment that we're in. We've got a lot of human laziness and apathy. I suppose we've always had that. It just seems that the media tends to really amplify that. Media is a big part of our problem. Anyway, these are my worries, including nukes. Still have nukes like we did in the 50s when we were getting underneath desks with the sirens going off. And of course, we've got AI apocalypse and genetic engineering apocalypse and all those doomer threats. And then, of course, a lot of us seniors worry about spending our last years kind of babbling away, particularly if it's a place that doesn't take good care of us for a lot of money. And also, just being a burden to our kids. But despite all those kinds of things that I unfortunately think about to some degree during the day, there is a number one issue. Will I outlive my money? That's the real question. So I think about this way too much. But it is my number one issue. I just, I watch the financial podcast, go, okay, everything's going up and down and all that. So that's a concern. Again, I don't want to be a burden to society or my kids or, family or otherwise. And so outliving my money, I have no idea how long I'm going to live. If you're like late 60, 70 now, you go, okay, well, I'm going to go another 2 years or 20 years or, 40 years, who knows? So outliving my money is a real concern. Outliving our money as boomers, I think, is a concern. And that's the number one issue that I think about too much daily. So the idea of outliving my money or our money has come up for a lot of us that have, say, decent traditional IRA balances, and yet we don't have a lot of cash flow. And what cash flow we do have is primarily Social Security and then taking distributions from the traditional IRA or TIRAs. So assets are rarely the worry, but what is the worry is secure income, regular secure income that would augment Social Security. And I kind of stole this from the Jim Helps folks, if some of you know who he is and that team is. But they have this concept, I don't know if they invented it, but it's called the minimum dignity floor, and trying to meet, what are the minimum things to keep your minimum dignity, at the floor level. Housing, transport, insurance, utilities, medical, Medicare, dental, pharma, food, sundry stuff like that. Medical and housing, particularly in the last few years, have just gone crazy in terms of inflation. And things like Medicare supplement having, for me, doubled in the last 5 years. It's just crazy time. So I worry about secure income because these things are not going down. There is no deflation or disinflation happening here. This is all about meeting the stuff in the future should I live another 10 or 20 years. So the question is, will I meet my future minimum dignity floor needs? As most boomers, I spent my life accumulating assets. I find it very hard to decumulate, and really it's just hard to change the way you've been for 40, 50 years. Doing things like IRA withdrawals seems so unnatural to me. I do not like doing that, and I kind of want to stop thinking about it and get to where I've just got secure income coming in and don't have to think about it as being an IRA withdrawal. But I do have to say this, that my minimum dignity floor is above what I get in Social Security. Clearly, the way inflation has affected medical and rent or housing. It's just the Social Security wasn't intended to be, and it is by no means enough to meet the minimum dignity floor. I am just laugh at these people who have 5 million or 10 million in assets, and they're in their late 60s or early 70s, and they're just they're crying because they don't have enough cash like to live on. And I'm going, what, are they out on, like, am I really just bad at saving, or are they like out on the third or fifth standard deviation and they just want to call in to complain about how high their assets are? And it's not really a complaint, it's a brag. I don't know, I don't get it. But with those kinds of assets, most people should not be worrying about how to turn that into cash flow. Anyway, the minimum dignity floor fear drives most of us who don't have 10 million in assets to this place of excessive investment caution, meaning you have too much caution around investing too aggressively. And so I just want to kind of put my money away, stop worrying about it. And the only way I can put my money, away in some investments is if I'm secure that I have enough secure income, or sure that I have enough secure income. So that's the deal. Just a bit more on this idea around it, being excessively cautious around investing for growth. A lot of us just have this fear. We don't want to, we're retiring or we're retired. We don't want to invest in these high-priced markets the way they have been historically. And we say to ourselves, I'm only going to invest when the market drops a lot. And of course, the market has only dropped, very quickly typically, and it's back up very quickly. And a lot of us just have ended up not saying, hey, I'm going to, put my money here. I'll wait. Anyway, it's a guessing game, right? And it's a loser's game. So the results for me anyway, end up being cash or bond or, cash alternative heavy and growth poor. And I'm hoping that with some more secure income to meet my dignity floor needs, that I will be less cautious, that I can put what remains in places like, domestic and international, kind of more generic ETFs, and just let them ride with the market and pay less attention there. Thinking a little more about secure income. What do I want? Okay, well, I've got some goals here. First, I really spend too much time thinking about, how do I make the perfect decision versus a good decision? What does they say? There's that saying about good is the enemy of, anyway, perfect is the enemy of good. I don't know. Anyway, that kind of applies here. I want some payment certainty, so I want a low risk. Like I even feel sometimes insurance companies, I don't know, I've never relied on them for payment, but there's a little bit more risk there than I suppose the U.S. government. I also nice to have would be inflation protection, given what's going on in housing and medical and buying just regular old stuff at the store. Things have gone way up. It seems particularly for seniors. So I've got these goals. That's kind of what I'm keeping in mind. Probably my biggest problem is like, you know, what's out there, all the stuff that's out there. Our problem, certainly my problem, is that there are way too many options. And when I talk to people, I think I don't really understand some of this. I understand a lot, or at least in how these instruments work. But I talk to other boomers, and there's like deer in headlights on what these things are, particularly when you get into annuities or, different financial instruments. It's like all over the place. Like people just have belief systems that they've put together, or they just like it's just too much for them to even think about it. Okay, so it's just in my mind, there's so many things. It's just hard to evaluate all. And this is getting to why I, kind of looked at tips, ladders and versus SPIAs. There are just too many other things, preferred stock and target date funds and REITs and dividend stocks and, bonds and MIGAs and FIAs and leveraged ETFs, which are really big anymore, like variable annuities. I mean, it's just crazy time if you're a boomer to try to understand all of these instruments, and then they're financially complex, logically complex, and it's just not a happy time. So, anyway, that word cloud kind of gives you an idea of all the stuff that's out there. Ultimately, if you watch YouTube and pundits and all of these people who claim to provide investment perspectives and all of that, it's just so confusing. And I just go, which is best? Just tell me the answer. And I think because of my finance background, for me anyway, I looked at all these options to the degree that I could understand them and said, okay, I at least understand what a tips ladder is. Finally, it didn't come immediately, and what a SPIA is versus other annuities. Those seem to fit the bill for me better than all those other options on that dollar sign word cloud that I just had. But my thing was I looked for people who discussed tips ladders versus SPIAs, and I couldn't see anyone who really provided me any insight to which of the two would be best for me or under what conditions would one versus the other be better. I just wanted a simple calculated view without complex formulas, just the basics. And I just could not find anyone who would tell me the answer I was looking for. So I thought, well, I'll just get back on a spreadsheet, back on Excel, and try to figure this out for myself, even though, again, as I claim, it's probably all wrong. Okay, so as I said, after having viewed the various alternatives to the degree that I could understand them, because there are lots of alternatives, as I said out there, about how you want to handle this secure cash flow, secure income to meet cash flow needs for your minimum dignity floor. Okay, SPIAs, tips, ladders, and other annuities. First, other annuities. Okay, it was a great financial crisis. My portfolio was cut in half. I was working 70-hour weeks, and a nice variable annuity salesperson knocked on my door and said, "We're going to take care of you. We're going to give you 6%." And it ended up not being that, and it ended up being lots of other things, including a lot of fees that basically reduced the balance of my portfolio or what I gave them. And I just said, hasta la vista, I want to get out of this. And there was a cost to getting out. So was not a happy thing. I would just say, if you're getting a 300-page printed contract, just make sure you understand what's in that contract. But I will say with SPIAs, they're more simple. It's basically where you just pay them. I'll give you an example. $100,000 you pay, and maybe they'll give you back 700, just to pick a number. 700 a month, 8,400 a year. Basically takes 12 years to get that back. Just do the math. 8,400 times 12 gives you about the 100,000, and then you're getting your own money back, because basically you're giving them your money, then they pay you back with your money, and then they start paying with their money after after the amount you paid is effectively gone. So it's obviously about who's gonna live. Are you gonna live longer than they expect, and how long, and how much money would they be out if you lived to be 20 more years or 30 more years than the 12 where you paid back your own money. Okay, TIPS ladder is a different thing. It's basically, think about it as a bond, Treasury inflation protected security. It's a bond. It gets its value. The bond's value might be 1,000 in year 0, and 1,030 at the end of year 1, and 1,065 at the end of year 2. And in other words, the value of the bond goes up every year. And there's also stated interest on those bonds, on some of the bonds in the ladder. So what you're bringing in terms of cash flow is a liquidation of whatever bond liquidates or is scheduled to liquidate or mature in that year, plus the interest you get from the other bonds. That's a TIPS ladder, and pretty simple. I'll show you how it works, and in the coming kind of review of the Excel. For simplicity's sake, I'm assuming there's just one funding source, and I'm doing it pre-tax. There are too many tax considerations, funding source considerations, whether it's Roth or traditional IRA or a brokerage account that you get the funds from to be able to get your secure income. So I'm just trying to simplify it to the initial investment in it is from a traditional IRA. Both the SPIA and the TIPS ladder will require a TRA investment that's probably big for most of us to think about, 100,000 plus just for, 700-800 a month kind of thing. The TIPS ladder, just the fact that it provides inflation protection, it's definitely larger. In this case, in the model, I'll show you the spreadsheet, it's 27% larger than the SPIA initial investment. But the TIPS does adjust with inflation every year, like that green arrow over time. SPIA does not. The annual dollars are always the same, the blue arrow. And with the SPIA, you're going to need to take some additional traditional IRA withdrawals to offset in the orange level kind of added to the blue, or the orange arrow added to the blue. There are a few different sites that you can use. Schwab.com is one, immediateannuities.com is another, and there are others that will, for free, just kind of let you play around with assumptions about what kind of annuity you want, and do you want how do you want the payments to occur? Do you want a single life only? Do you want 10 years certain, 20 years certain? In this case, you can see down on the lower left, it's a single life with 20 years certain, meaning that if I pass away in the first 20 years, the beneficiaries will receive the remaining payments for 20 years. The cost for this would be $113,913. And in the center there, you see the two blue circles. It's a deferred income annuity, same thing as a single premium immediate annuity, if you will, but it is beyond 1 year, so it's called a deferred income annuity because it's deferred past a year. A SPIA is within a year. And the monthly income is $736 per month or $8832 per year. Now covering the TIPS ladder assumptions. First, the left part of this that you see is a cutout from tipsladder.com. It shows the bottom left that there's 20 years of TIPS ladder, the ladder properties. There are a number of bonds you can buy that get you that specific TIPS ladder. In this case, I think it was 16-ish bonds that I had to buy. The net cost today was 144,461 or 144,000 rounded. The average per year is 8837, even though the way I set it was give me a minimum of 8260 on online there, and so it did give me that as the least amount I'd ever get in any one year, but the average overall is 8837, and that's from the tips ladder, and it sets you up with the bonds to buy and what years are funded and what your cash flow looks like every year. Again, from each bond as it liquidates and the interest you get from all the outstanding bonds. So here we are finally on slide 16 where we're getting to the spreadsheet. I know you're probably squinting. It drives me crazy when people show these squintable spreadsheets and particularly on YouTube or wherever. By the way, on YouTube, you can always change your factor on what your quality is. So you can always increase the quality on that little gear icon. But I'm going to go through this piece part by piece part and tell you how it compares the SPIA versus the TIPS ladder and what the cash flows look like for each of those. But again, the spreadsheet model right here does assume a 3% inflation rate in all 20 years and a 6% investment growth over those same years. This is a amplification of the Excel model inputs from that prior slide, something a little more visible. Okay, so the pre-tax target 736, that's just the number I kind of was thinking about. Annual target of that is times 12 or 8832. And the inflation rate, I'm assuming in the model, is 3% for the 20 years. The return on investment, meaning the return on all of the market investments, kind of irrespective of what type they are, it's like the averaged return that you would get on, bonds and cash and stocks, etc., would be 6%. Just because I'm having to use that to model what the cost is of these investments, since you're having to shell out money that you otherwise could be investing elsewhere. Okay, so the initial investment for the TIPS ladder ends up being, as you'll see later, 100. Well, I guess we saw it earlier. It's that 144,461 from the prior slide, and then the SPIA was that 113,913 from the Schwab site. The extra obvious is that SPIA is going to cost you less upfront than the TIPS ladder. Again, reminder that the TIPS ladder does give you that inflation protection. So, there's a balance going on there. The left half of the spreadsheet is shown here, and it is looking really at the cash flows that come from the TIPS ladder and the SPIA. So first column in gray is years 0 or 1 through 20. There's an inflation multiplier that's obviously compounded every year, and such that in year 20, the multiplier is 1.8 of the original amount, so that's just 3% compounded over 20 years. The TIPS ladder cash flow, roughly, again, that varies depending upon the TIPS, but just on average would be multiplied times that multiplier, and such that in year 20, the 1.8 times 8832 gives you 1595, or basically $16,000 in the inflation adjusted payment. So you end up with getting payments over 20 years, 244,439. The SPIA cash flow, however, is 176,640 over the 20 years, because it's just 8832. That's what you get in your bank, or whatever, wherever it's credited, that's what you get during the year is 8832. And so there is a shortfall, obviously, that the SPIA needs. And the presumption here, because we're just working with traditional IRAs, is that the extra that's needed will come out of the traditional IRA. So 176,640 plus the 67,799 gives you the 244,439. So that's just basically saying that's what extra amount you're going to need to take out. Okay, now the SPIA does need that extra cash flow to match the TIPS ladder. And how does it get that extra cash flow? Well, you have to go to your traditional IRA and just pull out some more, right? Because you're only getting 8832. You're going to need over the years 67,000 more. You're going to need to pull that in the light blue there. The SPIA accumulated cash flow needed is that 67,000. But by having to pull that out, you're going to have this investment gain that you would have otherwise gotten. I think the assumption was 6%, right? So you're going to have some lost gain, if you will, or gain that you never got because you're having to pull out additional investment along the way during the 20 years. And that investment you have to pull out, the value of that is 28,000 on top of the 67,000 that you're going to need to pull out to match the same cash flow that the TIPS ladder would have given you. Similar to the SPIA needing that extra cash flow every year to augment or supplement the amount that you actually get from the SPIA, you're going to need to, take out funds, presumably from your traditional IRA in this case, to augment to get you to the TIPS ladder. And of course, there's a cost to taking those what could have been invested or stayed invested funds out, and so that's that lost investment gain. But the same is an effect on the TIPS initial investment, since it costs 30,000 more upfront in the cases that we're looking at, and there's a real incremental cost to that of not being able to have that amount compound and grow. So if you take a look at that, that sums out to 67,424. Added to the 90,000 or the 30,548 gives you a 97,972 number, and that compares to the SPIA in blue there, where the cumulative cash flow you're going to need to take out of your TIRA, let's say, over time is 67,799, and the investment impacts of that are 28,366. So the total there is that it's a 96,165 cost, opportunity cost, if you will, and a 97,972 cost. So that's basically looks like we've got a wash going on here. To summarize, given this set of assumptions, it is a wash. At a 3% inflation rate, a 6% return on your investments over the 20 years, 96,165 versus 97,172. Either way, it's a wash between the two options. So you have to ask yourself, okay, well, what happens if there's higher inflation, or what happens if I have higher investment gains? And that's what I'll cover next. This first what if slide is, let's just assume there are higher investment returns than the 6% we had in the kind of base case model. So let's say assume it's 9%, inflation stays at 3%. And if you look down at the bottom, well, it basically favors the SPIA because, if you've got a 9% return on investment growth and you're having to take 30,000 more out initially from a TIPS ladder, wow, that has a much bigger impact. And although it impacts that higher rate impacts the SPIA, what you're taking out of your traditional IRA in this case occurs over a longer period of time rather than that big chunk, that big 30,548 you take out initially. So basically, for a TIPS ladder, if you think about what this means is, if you assume that inflation is going to stay relatively low, investment gains are going to be relatively high, then it might make sense to go do a SPIA just based on this probably incorrect math. This other what if is assuming you've got higher inflation. And in this case, per the upper left-hand side there where it says inflation rate, instead of being 3% as it was in base case, it's 5%. ROI, or the amount you get on your investments, presumably during those 20 years, stays at the base case 6%. So as you can imagine here, you are favoring the TIPS ladder in this case due to the fact that the TIPS ladder is adjusting for inflation. So if you take a look down at the green column At the bottom, it's now 306,000 in payments that have been made. Excuse me. And that was off of the initial ladder of 144,000. And I think year 20 in the base case was like 15.9, 16,000 of TIPS ladder cash flow. Well, now because inflation's higher and the bonds are re-rated at a higher level, and when they liquidate or when they mature, you end up getting the higher amount. So your payment then in year 20 would be 23,000. Of course, the SPIA is still only paying you in year 20, 88.30. In year 20, it's paying you 88.32. So you've got to take 14,602 out of your traditional IRA, presumably, if that's what you're using. So you end up having to take a lot more out of your traditional IRA to kind of catch up with inflation, since your SPIA payment is just a straight payment of the same number for 20 years. So the fact that you did have to take out an additional larger amount from your TIRA for your TIPS ladder, that's offset by the fact that you're having to take a lot more out over time with the SPIA, because the SPIA is not keeping up with inflation the way the TIPS ladder does. So SPIA loses to the TIPS to the tune of 84,000 in this case. Then what does it all mean? Well, in this case, it means that it depends on your outlook. You think there's going to be high inflation, then go with the TIPS ladder. You think you're going to get high market returns, combination of all your investments, then a SPIA might be the right choice. In conclusion, I am wrong about everything, as I said earlier, but these are my personal preferences. First, I don't trust you as politicians to hold down inflation. First of all, I don't think the inflation adjustments that occur, CPI or whatever, really reflect what's happening to seniors. We are just like way hit by increasing medical costs, cost of living, housing, that kind of thing. It's not a happy situation. So I don't trust it, but at least it's something. It's better than not having inflation adjusted, and inflation adjusted assets at all outside of Social Security. And even then, I'm not sure I trust Social Security over the long term to really keep up. It seems that even those rates are tempered down, whatever, for not giving us what is true senior inflation. Also, things change. SPIAs are a big long-term commitment. That 114,000. What if I got a couple months or years down the road and just said I wish I wouldn't have done that? I don't want to be kicking myself. I do change my mind a lot. On the flip side, I like diversifying my risk, and although I've already pulled the trigger on the TIPS ladder, I am going to do some of both. I'm going to go back, look at a SPIA, maybe a couple hundred additional per month to get me to that $1,000-ish pre-tax number that I'd like to have, and that would supplement, of guaranteed income that would supplement my Social Security and allow me to reach the minimum dignity floor that I'm at. This is it, the final slide. Again, you got to rely on your own analyses. I did this for me. I thought it might be helpful for somebody to kind of look at it and say, yeah, I might need to go do something like that for myself. And, give you an idea, some direction from some wayward person who has a little bit of financial experience, a lot of it being, pretty poor. So I don't know if you learn from your mistakes over time or not. I will say that AI has been a pretty good resource for, kind of bantering back and forth about what I was planning on doing here. And lastly, apologies for the droning. I know it's like my own voice puts me to sleep. So anyway, take care.